Welcome to another edition of Peace Pipe TV. I want to thank you all for coming out today. It's greatly appreciated. Not to sound cliche, but you could be anywhere else in the world, but you here with us. We definitely appreciate that. We definitely have a treat for you all today. We have Dr. Fatou here, one of my good friends, and I am really excited for this because her and we bounce information off of each other every day, every day, all day. So a lot of this that you guys are about to hear is kind of foreign to you, but I want you to have an open mind to what you are about to, experience because this is going to be very insightful. This woman is so brilliant to me. She's one of my favorite people to dialogue with, and I think that you all are going to love this presentation. It's called the genetic compositions of the Black American and Caribbean population. I want you all to kick back, get your popcorn, your drink, just relax and have an open mind. I know a lot of you don't like DNA. A lot of us don't, but you have to understand that just your family tree alone is not going to do it. Your, this DNA stuff and your family tree is the one-two punch. It's proving who you are. So, without further ado, this woman needs no introduction, and I just want you guys to listen to her. And if you have any questions, please write them down and we'll reserve the questions, at the end of the show, or she might want to stop and answer questions. But without further ado, I'm gonna let the doctor do her thing and I'm gonna go to the background. This is it's your show, doctor. You do what you do, and I'm gonna fade to the background. And once again I thank you so much for coming on this show.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Dr. Fatou Diarra, and some of your listening audience probably already know me. I got into DNA a few years ago because, with regard to studying our people, because what I found was that doing just genealogy alone didn't suffice. It's very important to do genealogy, but for those of us who come from enslaved lineages, um, and you look to genealogical records, you really can't go beyond 1870. And even if you have a strong oral history, there's a type of, you're limited in terms of how far you can go back. And um, what motivated me to really get into the DNA was, number one, I had certain questions that different groups who were teaching about our people and our ancestors being indigenous to the Americas, there were certain things they could not answer because DNA testing was becoming more and more popular. And I'm one into DNA, and I feel like the same way an Italian could have confirmation on genetic studies, someone from Australia, whatever part of the world can have confirmation with their DNA studies. As far as I'm concerned, if we're speaking the truth, our DNA studies should also confirm who we are. Okay, but I realized that majority of what we were getting as DNA results, African, didn't seem to line up with what we were being told from people in our families, like our grandmothers, great grandmothers, oral stories about who we are, and other data that supports that, in fact, most of our ancestors were ancient to this landmass. And the other thing as well is, while for me personally, I have been able to put my hands on my free ancestors and find them before the 1870 census. And as I'm sure many of you know, that the state recognized tribes, some of them are trying to gain federal recognition. I think all of them are actually, but not all of them have it. But the state tribes, the advantage that they have is that majority of the members do in fact descend from free people of color. And so because they have access to their ancestors being on records, they are able, the difference between them and the rest of the population of so-called African Americans is that uh, they're able to prove on record their lineage, whereas someone who comes from enslaved ancestors cannot. So I felt like I could, if I could master as much as possible interpreting this DNA with regard to our people, then I felt like I was somewhat of a spokesman for those that felt like they did not have that paper trail. And I feel the paper trail is somewhat used against a lot of our people. So I wanted to study the DNA, not to replace genealogy, but it's my way of giving a voice to people who did not have that proof beyond or before 1870, so they can walk in their truth with the same degree of pride. Because the idea of being born free, okay, that was created by foreigners. That whole definition was created by foreigners. Our people was on their own land. So I have a problem with defining myself as an indigenous person based on a paper trail that was created by somebody else. And furthermore, seeing a part of our people who has that paper trail, okay, use that against others who don't. So in this way, if I could educate as many people to understand the DNA, they can walk with their heads up and be just as proud. And they do not need validation from that lineage, from a free status, because they will understand what they can't uh, get from records, they will be able to get from the DNA. So that's where I come in. So we can get started. So basically,
Hold on. Hey, doctor, wait 1 second. Whenever you need me to move the screen, just say next slide, okay? Or go down, okay?
Okay, thanks a
Okay.
lot. So anyway, my focus has pretty much, I've zoned in on the North American population, erroneously called African Americans, and the Caribbean population, not so much the Latin Caribbean. And the reason why, it's not because people of Latin America do not have a claim to being indigenous. It's because there is a shared heritage with the North American population and the people from the British Caribbean. And so whatever I'm saying also applies to both populations. We are separate because we have indigenous ancestors in both land areas, but we also share things in common. So it was easier for me to just group those two, study them separately, but it's because I see the genetic link as well, the historical link. And as we move on, your listening audience will see that link. So that has been my main focus in terms of my study. So you can move to the next slide.
Hold on 1 second. For some reason, it's not letting me go down. That's odd. Yeah, that's weird.
Okay, so let me,
Let me go out and go in
okay.
because it's not letting me. Oh, I see why. It froze on this end. Okay, let's go like this. Let's go share. Okay, you can see that, right? There we go. There we go.
Yes, okay. And I apologize, some of this writing is small, but this basically is a screenshot. So your listening audience can take notes. They can go and investigate and read in detail these same articles. So I want them to see that the basis of my conclusions, it comes from studies. All right. I'm not just picking stuff out of the thin air. So this is a study that was done on the Wampanoag tribe. They're an Algonquian speaking tribe from Massachusetts. And what I want the listening audience to understand is that we have the same genetic findings as this population. So they know their lineage. These people know they're indigenous, they're Indian, and that's not up for debate. But what I want all of you to understand is what were the findings. You can move to the next slide. Okay, so I know that's hard to read, but let me just summarize that for you very quickly. So basically, in this slide, what we're, hold on, they're really talking about how the majority of the DNA belongs to African, it comprises of African haplogroups, mitochondrial, which is inherited from the mother, and from the father, the patrilineal Y haplogroups. And here they're talking about how a good portion of the Wampanoag, in fact, descended from L3E. And the reason why they regarded that as truthful, because they gave, these different individuals gave an oral history of descending from the same ancestress. They gave the name of the same ancestress, and these were different individuals, and they all had the mitochondrial DNA group L3E, but there were different mitochondrial DNAs in the first paragraph, anywhere from L0, L1, L2, L3, and we, as so-called African Americans and Caribbean people, we get the same thing. You can move on to the next slide.
You want me to move like,
Okay, that's actually let's talk about that, because
okay,
that was the mitochondrial DNA. This
okay.
is dealing with the Y haplogroups, and a good portion of them was the E1B1A, which is what 60% of Afro-Caribbean and Afro-American males get, and you had some R1Bs as well, okay, which they call Eurasian. That's all that's saying. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is from Wikipedia. This is talking about macro haplogroup mitochondrial DL. This is called mitochondrial Eve. She is the founder. She is the mother of all groups. And they will tell you this is located on the African continent. So the assumption is that everyone with that mitochondrial DNA is African and came on a boat. That's what we're led to believe. But you know what? They spoke some truth very slickly. And if you go to the next slide, I want to point it out. And this is in Wikipedia. Right there. When you look in that same article and you go to the very first line, I want you to read that carefully under the subtitle Americas. Haplogroup L lineages are found in the African diaspora of the Americas as well as indigenous Americans. And they stop it right there, by the way. They just threw that out. So they're letting you know there are indigenous Americans that have mitochondrial DNA L. And I noticed they made that indigenous with a small I. But anyway, okay, so we can move to the next slide. I'm just giving evidence, background evidence. Okay, this was a study, and there's been several studies done on the Lumbee tribe. The Lumbee tribe is a Southeast tribe located in North Carolina, Southeast North Carolina. And they're really an amalgamated tribe. They are comprised of Algonquian, Siouan, Iroquoian, and they're also mixed with Sephardic Jews, Spaniard, Portuguese DNA, British, Irish, and they are like any other tribe. They've been mixing among themselves in the past 300 years. So they've formed a genetic community And the good thing is that they have been willing to participate in DNA studies, and that's not easy to get the people, particularly east of the Mississippi, to participate in DNA studies as a group. And I understand it because not having Asian DNA, which is the DNA that's termed Native American, is used against them. So many of them are reluctant to participate in the studies, but we're happy that they did. So anyway, when you look at their DNA, the finding shows that 96% of African or European lineage, that's the average person, has African or European lineage, with the remaining 4% reflecting a combination of West Asian and what they call indigenous. And what they're using indigenous interchangeably with Native American, which are the Asian immigrants who came here 10,000 and less years ago. Those are the people they're referring to. Next slide. Okay. So let me just say this. So right now, so far, we can see that the people who know their lineages and who belong to the tribes have a predominance of African, I say that in quotes, African DNA. And this is another part of the study. This is the Lumbee male haplogroups. And we can see here, if you look at EM2, they were not the majority in their population, which does not surprise me, but they came in, I would say, third. EM2 is found in below North Africa. You tend to have EM2, which is also known as E1B1A, which is found among so-called African Americans and Caribbean populations. But I would say the majority had European, and that doesn't surprise me because they are highly admixed with Europeans. So when it comes to the Y haplogroup in a group like this, that doesn't surprise me. Okay, move to the next slide. But what we're going, can you zoom that in a little more, like expand it? Great. But see, what we want to do is pay attention to this. These are the mitochondrial haplogroups of the Lumbee. And we know for many of the tribes, proof of descent is through the woman, okay? And if you look, you will see at L, which is the second on the right column, L, sub-Saharan Africa. Right there, you will see the majority of the members had L as their mitochondrial DNA, just like us, okay? And that's what I wanted to show in that study. You can go to the next slide. All right, so why am I showing this map of Africa and what's important about it? I'm showing this because the area that's colorized is the Bantu area. Now, this is very important because when you use third-party tests, I mean tests that, like, not 23andMe, not Ancestry, MyHeritage, no, none of those, but let's say other DNA tests created by geneticists, where you upload your raw data and they give you all your percentages. I don't care how tiny they are. So nothing is omitted. And they compare your DNA against various groups. What so-called Afro-Americans will see, and majority Caribbeans, they will see that their DNA is closest to the people from those areas, this orange area. And that's the Bantu area of Africa. Now, I know many people say Bantu is not a politically correct term. I'm using it for this purpose. Those are the Bantu areas. There are different groups, different ethnicities, different languages, but they share a similar type of ancestral composition. And it starts from the very eastern, southern portion of Nigeria, involving Cameroon, and it sweeps across the Congo involving Kenya, Tanzania, bottom portion of Somalia, the tip of Ethiopia, going all the way down to South Africa. And the part that's not included will be the Kway area. That's why it's not included, because those are the Khoisan. Okay. And then Madagascar is left out because they really are a miscegenated population, but they are primarily Bantu mixed with Southeast Asians. So they could have been included. And we are genetically closest to this population. And I'm going to show you. Next slide. Okay. So one of the things that I want my listening audience to understand is that try to think of African DNA, particularly Bantu type DNA, as global. Think of the word African as founder DNA, the first DNA of the planet, and remove the word African because it's really a play on words and it confuses people. But the truth is, Bantu type DNA, just like the Pygmies, these were global populations that inhabited the whole world. The Pygmies are the oldest with the Khoisan, and I will tell you that the Bantus are right after the Pygmies and the Khoisan, and they are found everywhere, and I'm going to prove it to you. So this is the GED match of a full Lebanese. Okay, so when you look at the left column, you see Druze, because actually that's our area of Lebanon where his ancestors came from, Druze Lebanese. You can see they have him matched to Jews from Georgia, some Palestinians. These are all adjacent people, so it makes sense. So we are very clear that this person is a Lebanese. Now, when you look at his secondary populations, the secondary populations will show you who his founder ancestors were before he became the modern category of Lebanese, because that reflects what he is today. So if you look, I want you to zoom in on that top Bantu. See that Bantu? And then when you go, you see Lemba. That's also another Bantu group. Under Mozambique, you got Lemba right there. Then under the Lemba, you got the Biaka Pygmies. Again, this is the Levant. All right. This is not even in the middle of Africa. It's adjacent to Africa. So I'm just showing that that DNA was global. You can go to the next slide. Okay. Now, this is the DNA of someone from Ghana, all right, a West African. And when you look at her populations on the left, that's what she's genetically now, which is West African. When you look at her right column, again, that's what she was in ancient times, and these are her founder populations. Let's go over it. Pygmy, you see it there. Then when you start going down, the second from the third from the bottom, we can zoom in on it. You see that Bantu right there is actually 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 right there. She has Bantu. This is just one calculator. I've seen it on several of her calculators as well. I just picked, one randomly to show the audience. So Bantu is right there with the Pygmy, okay? In terms of the more ancient of even a West African, you can see it's the most ancient, not the most, but it's among the more ancient of a Levantine, such as the Lebanese. Go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm showing this young man. This is a young man from Samoa, and he talks about, he actually is on TikTok, and he talks about how Some of the tattoos that's found among his people go back to the Kikuyu people of Kenya and how his ancient ancestors come from Kenya. He's not lying, because one of the things that I cannot see is what's inside of a Polynesian's DNA. And that's the limitation that even the third party tests do not give us. But I thank the owner, Chris Lusakis of Native DNA, and because he is the founder of that genetic company, and it's a very good company for those who are interested. He did a video on Hawaiian DNA because it was very personal for him. His father is part Hawaiian. And he said that when you look at the breakdown of Polynesian people's DNA, their most ancient ancestry is Bantu. They have 20 to 25% on average African DNA, specifically Bantu. Okay, and this is coming from the owner and founder of Native DNA, and he's not black. I say that in quotes. He looks quite Caucasian, but he's just honest. We can go to the next slide. Okay. Well, we can expand that. So this is 5,000-year-old Iceman who had dark skin and a receding hairline. That's Otzi. All right. Otzi is a 5,000-year-old frozen mummy. He was found in the Alps. And I'm going to show you, looking at his genetic composition, that he had Bantu DNA. And this is in Europe. Next slide. So that's how he looks, so we can go to the next slide. Okay. Now, let's look at his second column. Now, if you looked at Otzi's ancestral composition, he was somewhere like about 15 to 16 percent what they call sub-Saharan African. He had about maybe 20-something percent South Asian DNA. But, I can rest assure you that Otzi was brown. He was quite miscegenated. But I want to look at his secondary population. So let's zoom in on that slide and look at that second column. All right. So you can see San, they're similar to the Khoisan. Okay. You can see Sudanese. You see the Pygmy. You see that Bantu. You see that Luwia. Luwia is a Bantu group from Kenya. You have the Hadza. They're hunter-gatherers from the Tanzania, Southeast Africa area. And again, you see the Pygmy. So what I'm showing, I'm only demonstrating that this DNA that they're calling Bantu was all over the globe. Okay, next slide. So this is an article that was put out by DNA Consultants. This is a DNA testing company. And there's something called the Mozambican gene. And this basically affirms what I'm saying. The Mozambican gene is from, needless to say, Mozambique. Now, Mozambique is a Bantu, in the Bantu area, okay? And when you read about it, it will tell you that that gene is found in Tibetans, Navajo natives, and African Americans, okay? Now, the value of that is that it's just reaffirming that that DNA, again, was global. So there's no need for anybody to run from African DNA. If anything, it reaffirms our ancientness on the planet. The trick is getting you to think it means you come from Africa, because they use African terms, or put it this way, they applied those terms to Africans, because some of those terms even Africans reject, but they have applied those terms to Africans, and so therefore they labeled the DNA, so it confuses people. But this is global ancient DNA, and that's all it is. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm showing this because anybody that's serious needs to read this report. You can find it on Google. You can type it in just like that. Tyrone Lewis Cannon is a genius. And his findings,
Yes, he is.
he's a genius, because everything else that I'm saying is secondary to the point that he's making. Okay? Because what he found was that, we can go to the next slide, because I screenshot his findings, which is from the papers. So your audience can take their time and go through this. So I understand he's done more recent studies than this, Nico.
Oh yeah, he has. But this right here is actually how I started learning right here. This is amazing.
Exactly. Me too. That's because basically in his findings, he had 300 and something African Americans participate, 318. And what he discovered was that 88% of them had what we call Native American. That's the population who are Asians. 88% of us had their DNA. And when you add Southeast Asian with the Native American, 99.7%, almost 100% of us had that. Okay. Now, when you look at the Papuan people in Papua New Guinea, a good portion of them have Southeast Asian DNA. So it really is a marker of oceanic lineage. The people that are in Samoa and all of those people, they will have similar genetic findings in terms of Southeast Asian DNA. Now, why is this important, and why am I harping on this? The reason why this study is so important for our people in North America, because the Austronesian people were the earliest seafarers, and for almost 100% of us to possess those markers means that we had to be here when they came in. Or let's put it this way, a good portion of our lineage had to be here. And the reason why I slightly corrected myself, because I understand everybody doesn't identify as indigenous. Some people identify as Moorish. Some people identify themselves as, however you choose to identify yourself, it does not matter, because when you possess those markers, what it means is that a good portion of your lineage had to be here. If you are identifying with the lineage that wasn't here, that's your choice. Okay? But that's what it means. And let me tell you something. For the people like me who look at DNA all day, every day, from just random people even, this rule right here stands up. It is hard to find a so-called African American with roots out of North America who does not possess this. So now the question becomes, well, why is it that because people will say, well, if this is true, I took ancestry DNA, it didn't show that. My cousin had Filipino, and my other cousin had Native American, but I didn't get anything. So let me explain. When you use a company like Ancestry DNA or any company like that, they reserve the right to only report what they deem should be reported if it is a certain percentage. That's their right, which means that if they decide that they will only report percentages over 3% and you are 2.8, then you will not show Native American and Southeast Asian. Okay? You will not show it. But it doesn't mean it's not there. And this is why I encourage people to use third-party testing like GEDmatch, and there's so many other tests. Participate in as many as your heart's desire, because that's when you will begin to see certain patterns. So when the DNA is stripped naked and there isn't anybody controlling what will be presented, that's when you will see, okay, my cousin perhaps has 3.2% and I have 1.5%, but it's still there. And that's what's important. It is still there. So the advantage of 23andMe is that when it comes to those markers, they show it regardless of how tiny they are. And that is significant for our people in terms of seeing the truth of this study. You can go to the next slide. So pretty much he's just elaborating on how you can find Mexicans with some Southeast Asian DNA. That's not in all Mexicans. That's particularly in Mexicans from the Pacific area, like Guerrero and Oaxaca. And that gets a little tricky because there was a slave trade from the Philippines and Southeast Asia, but it'll come. I have a sample of a timeline of a Mexican, and I'm gonna show you the trick in determining if it's from slavery versus the Austronesians that came here from ancient times. But we can go to the next slide. Okay, so enough talking, and let's show examples. So on the left is my uncle, and on the right is a cousin of ours who actually is a Nottoway tribal member. We're related to her non-Nottoway side. So I'm focusing in on what Dr. Tyrone Lewis Cannon was speaking about. So East Asian and Native American. So this number will vary from person to person. And my uncle, it's 0.6, and in my cousin, it's 2.8. Okay. This is because these are random, so it doesn't make one any less or more indigenous. In fact, I have more markers than my uncle, and my father was from Ghana, so there's no way I'm more indigenous than him. So that's not a marker of how indigenous we are, because remember, those people came here on us. All right, let me just emphasize that. You can go to the next slide. So this is, again, their markers in detail. And what do you have? Notice the Filipino Austronesian. That's the Austronesian DNA. The Indonesian and Khmer, that's the Austronesian DNA that Tyrone Lewis Cannon is talking about. Okay? And then, of course, my uncle doesn't get the indigenous. Even though I do, he doesn't, because it's randomly inherited. But she gets it. Okay? And then they also get the Central Asian and South Asian. And I may deal with that later. I think I will. But the main thing is from this slide, the importance of those Austronesian markers. All right. You can move to the next slide. All right. So I'm just showing Ancestry DNA results. And let me see right here. This is my uncle's, okay? And this is his full report, actually, even though a little bit is cut off. I think the bottom is Norway. This is an example of what I'm talking about. We saw his results on 23andMe, but on his Ancestry DNA, nothing appears. They make no mention of Southeast Asian anywhere. So that's because they did not recognize reporting it because it was underneath their threshold of reporting. That's what I'm showing here. You can move to the next slide. All right. Now, that's my cousin who belongs to the Nottoway. And those are her results. So she had pretty decent percentage that met their guidelines. So now they're reporting it as Western Philippines. They're in the very bottom. You can go to the next slide. I think we all know who this is. So this is Russell Wilson. And my understanding from tribal members that his family knows that they're indigenous. They know they're indigenous. He may not be loud with it, but they know that they are indigenous. So he actually did ancestry DNA, and I saw the results. So I put it up. Next slide.
Uh-oh.
And this is what he got.
Oh, wow. I'm sorry. I get a little excited. I'm sorry. I'm a viewer.
Well, it's nice to know people get excited about this stuff. But I'm excited about it. Anyway, if you notice up at the top, we're going to break that down. I mean, the subdivisions underneath the African. Notice that 27% Cameroon Congo? Let's pay attention to that. Remember I said that indigenous people, our DNA was closest to the Bantu people, which is an ancient DNA right behind Pygmy Khoi people. Notice his preponderance of Cameroon Congo. So evidently with Ancestry DNA, that's what they use as their Bantu marker, okay? And that will change depending on the test. Don't get caught up into Cameroon Congo. It doesn't mean he's literally got ancestors that were snatched out of Cameroon and the Congo. It is a marker of his genetic similarity. And the fact that he has a decent percentage that comes out of that area, or similar, not comes, but similar to that area, speaks to his lineage, all right? And then you'll notice the Ivory Coast, the Nigerian, the Mali, the Benin, Togo, that North Africa, we're going to get there, that's Senegal. And then you notice he has just a tiny little bit of Pygmy, all right? And then he has a lot of European. We're going to deal with that, the West Asian and the Central Asia. That Central Asia, by the way, they are like the Ugi, what do you call, what's the Central Asian group? I'm a little tongue-tied here. Like Ugyar people, they're Uzbekis. These people are Russian. They look like Asiatics, but they're from Uzbek, Central Asia. That's what that is. And they also migrated here, by the way. And those of us from North America, we tend to have matches to them. So it's not uncommon for us to occasionally get Central Asia. And let me just say this. That other West African DNA, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Mali, Benin, Togo, Senegal, West African DNA equals Moorish. And I want your audience to remember that, because as we move on, I'm going to show it. So West African equals Moor. And then you have the Bantu. Move to the next slide. Okay, so this is the timeline of a Mexican. And actually, you can you reduce it a little bit, because they're missing the juiciest part. All right. So when you have people that want to argue with us about the fact that we're not indigenous and they're indigenous, well, don't argue. Let's do DNA. This is why when they say let's do DNA, I love it. So this is a Mexican who did DNA. And now you can zoom in. What comes in last? This is his timeline. The thing that came in the last to his that's right. In the beginning, let's go over it. See at the bottom, what do you have? Indonesia, Thai, Myanmar, Khmer Myanmar, that's the Southeast Asian, that's the Austronesian. And if you notice, it mixed in with what? His Bantu, or yeah, that was a man, his Bantu DNA, the Angola, Congo. See, they don't use Cameroon and Congo in the 23andMe. They use the Angola and the Congo and Southeast African. Let's take a look. So his most ancient ancestors were Austronesian mixed up with the Bantu mixed up with the Pygmy. This is the Mexican. His most ancient ancestors are Native American. Let's go to the top now. As you start moving up, you get the Senegal, you get the Southeast African. Okay, we're going to deal with that. The Nigerian, Ashkenazi Jewish, okay, because they also came here or, mixed in. Then you got the Filipino, because why? You had Filipino slave trading and the Asian slave trading going on in Mexico. That's why it's near the top with those Spaniards. And the Balkan just represents Gypsy DNA, by the way. We're going to get to that too. Okay? And then you have the Spanish and the Portuguese. And look at his Native American at the top. How can they be the most ancient people? I'm not saying they weren't here a long time. I'm just saying, how can you be the most ancient if that's up at the top? Next slide. So this is an individual who posted this publicly, so I'm not exposing anybody's face. He exposed it for he's from the Cree tribe. He's a Cree native. And for some reason, the founder of Native DNA, Chris Lusakis, he said he doesn't know why, but for some reason, a lot of Cree people do have Austronesian markers as well. So if you zoom in on that bottom part, you can see he shares that right with us. There you go. So you see that Indonesian Thai Khmer. For some people, they get Filipino, Austronesian, but all of it is Austronesian. All right. So the Cree natives of Canada, a lot of them show this, and not all Canadian natives show it. It's not all, but all of us show it. Okay. All right. Next slide. I almost forgot to include these people in the beginning when I was talking about the global nature of our DNA. These are Afro-Abkhazian. These are Black Caucasians. They are an ancient people there. And you can move to the next slide. And Zana of Abkhazia, we have her DNA. She had hirsutism and she had some sort of genetic defect. And we have a sample of her DNA. And when you look at her DNA, you will see that her primary populations are all Bantu. Bantu, that's the primary populations that she has. Okay, so again, it demonstrates the global nature of that DNA and the fact that people who are indigenous will have more of that DNA. Next slide. All right. So the advantage of the Lumbee people participating in genetic studies works to so-called African Americans' benefits. Because why? This is a Lumbee individual who gave me access to his DNA, which I really appreciate. So I did the MDLP16. I uploaded his data to the MTLP16 on GenMatch. And because he is a Lumbee, the first population he matched was Lumbee. So we're not surprised. But I want you to pay attention to the first 4 populations that are closest to him. You can see Biaka Pygmy, Lemba, and they are a Bantu people from Zimbabwe. And then you have Bantu, okay? I'm not going to deal with anything else because I'm dealing with the original aspect of our DNA and what makes us indigenous. Okay, go to the next slide. No, it was that one. This slide before that one, exactly that. All right. So, are you able to kind of make that a little big? There you go. So, when you look at his DNA using a different oracle, okay, I forgot the name of this particular oracle, but I believe it's another MDLP. They don't have Lumbee as a test population, and this is the same Lumbee man DNA. The first population that he matches is who? Afro-American Denver population. So what does that tell you? That tells you that Afro-Americans, random Afro-Americans that were picked, the test population in Denver, Colorado, are genetically very similar to Lumbee people. So by deductive reasoning, if Lumbee are indigenous, then Afro-Americans are indigenous too. Okay, now let's look at the population underneath. The city people are people in India whose roots are from the Bantu areas. They were taken by the Arab slave traders, and many of them were brought there to India. And they have Bantu type DNA. A lot of them came out of the Mozambique area. So if you notice, once again, the similarity to Bantu type of DNA. And then underneath that, the Luo tribe of Kenya, they're also a Bantu tribe. And then you just got the Bantu of Kenya, which is a generalized test group. And look at all that Bantu. South Africa, Bantu, Kikiu, Maasai. Then after all of that matching to all those different Bantu tribes, what do you have? Mandenka, Gambia, Mende, Yoruba, Isan, which is a type of Yoruba, Yemeni. Now, what's all of that? Those are the Moors and the mixture of the Moors, and we're going to deal with that, okay? But they mixed in, and that's why they are not at the very beginning, okay? Next slide. So, this is a Jamaican patient of mine. He gave me access to his DNA. And you know, I love when DNA shows the history, and I love when it serves like a footprint of our ancestors. So, just like us, his primary population, this is the MDLP22, his primary population shows that he's most similar to a Bantu people in their reference group called Lemba, just like for us. Now, let's take a look on the right. Now, we're dealing with Puerto Rico. That's the Arawak Taino that it's picking up in him. You're looking at the Spaniard, the Sardinian, even he matches Otzi. If you see that, Otzi, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, Otzi. Otzi was that 5,000-year-old frozen mummy. Believe it or not, they sample our DNA against that. That's a form of archaeogenetics. But what I want the audience to pay attention to is, you see that Lumbee? 6 from the bottom. The Lumbee tribe, as I've mentioned, are an amalgamated tribe of Algonquian, Siouan, Iroquoian people mixed with some colonists. But he is showing that he has some Lumbee in his secondary population. What does that mean? Remember, there was the American Indian slave trade before the Moors came here and Moors were coming here before there was a slave trade. We'll deal with that. However, they came here in abundance as slaves. They came here as conquerors. They came here as slaves. They came here as friends. They came here in different ways. But that reflects the American Indian slave trade. That's why he has some of that. Next slide. Now, I'm showing this for a reason. This is the ancestral composition of an Algerian from Algeria. And I'm showing this because what I want the audience to realize is the similarity in the ancestral composition of these people and ours. Now, Algerians are Berbers, and I understand they feel about that term Berber the way people from the African continent feel about that word Bantu. They are more correctly called Amizigh people. Okay, now I want you to zoom in on that for me. And if you notice, okay, I'm going to deal with this. That North African, you notice how accurate that is. They localized him to Algeria. And if I were to click on that, which I don't have access to this stuff, it'll tell me literally the cities that he's from. So this DNA is very detailed. So let me talk about this category of North Africa, because a lot of people are tricked into it. It's a lot of game playing. North Africans are only genetically different from the rest of their brethren in a modern way. And I will repeat that. North Africa, when I'm speaking genetically, is a modern construct. And a North African, and this is the geneticist definition, not mine, is a mixture of what they call sub-Saharan African, which means the Africans that inhabited the whole continent, mixed with South Europe, mixed with West Asian elements. And West Asia will be the area of the Levant and Turkey and things like that. And all of those mixtures today creates the North African. And they form a genetic community. And a genetic community, from the perspective of a geneticist, is created by the same group population intermixing among themselves for a period of roughly 300 years. It creates a type of genetic signature that geneticists can recognize. And so therefore, when any of us participate, it can recognize these genetic communities because they went around the planet and tested a whole lot of people, and it allocates us to a genetic community. So in this case, he has a certain percentage of his DNA that was allocated to the genetic community of North Africa in that particular region, which only tells me that's his miscegenated portion. That's the miscegenated portion of his DNA. That's all it is. Now, I want us to look at the portion of his DNA that's not so miscegenated. And on that note, let me say, you can move to the next slide, or you can expand it, I should say. Let me say this, that not all of North Africa is fair and mixed. In the upper socioeconomic status are the miscegenated, and the lower socioeconomic status are the ones that are not so miscegenated and indistinguishable from surrounding Africans. Okay, let me say this. So now, Amizigh people, and this is very important for your audience to take note of what I'm about to teach. Amizigh people have a genetic pattern that is exact to Afro-American people from North America in particular, but it also includes the Caribbean, okay? But particularly Afro-Americans. Now, what is their unique characteristic? They have a tendency to have 4 different African groups at the same time. And I will tell you what those groups are. It will be Nigerian, which could be Yoruba or Igbo, right? It will be Senegambian. Some tests will call it Gambian. Again, it depends on the test. Ghanaian, which can be Akan or Mende or both. And then they will have a Bantu group, which in Ancestry DNA will be a Cameroon Congo. In My Heritage, it will be Kenya. And 23andMe, it will be Angola Congo and Southeast Africa. Okay, now, because this individual only has 22% of an unmixed portion of his DNA that's manifesting, you notice you caught 3 groups, but you did not get the Bantu. But we will see other examples of those that are even less miscegenated, who are Amizigh from North Africa, and you will see the Bantu there, because by definition, that is their characteristic. Now, I want you to pay attention. If you could zoom on that a little bit more, and I'm going to show you, this is what happens when you create computer-generated models. Now, this is a man from Algeria, but notice what they gave him, Fula and Roloff, the same things that many of you who participate in 23andMe get.
Ooh.
Roloff people are not in Algeria, neither are Fulanis. But what happened is that it recognized that DNA because so many of us have that same pattern. And many of you who have the V5 chip, which is the latest chip, a lot of you are getting that Fulan roll-off, aren't you? Some people get Mandinka too. And this is an Algerian. And also, let's go down. You see that Northeast African? A lot of you are getting a little bit of tiny Somali and Sudanese. That's an Amizigh pattern from North Africa. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So remember, they have 4 African groups. Now, this is a Tunisian. And this Tunisian is not that miscegenated. Now, mind you now, where Tunisia is right there by the Mediterranean. You can't go further north than Tunisia, okay? So this person, I'm very happy that they went public and shared their DNA test on Reddit. That was a gold mine for me, okay? So let's zoom in and look at their DNA. And I'm sorry that it's blurry. So you can see here, can you scroll up a little? You see that I'm sorry, scroll down, pardon me. Senegambian, the Nigerian, okay? And then he has that North African. He doesn't have the 4 groups here, but I saw it somewhere else. But he has, if they don't have a whole lot, they may not show you the 4 groups, but trust and believe it's an Amizigh pattern. And then he has the Ethiopian, the Northeast African, and Egyptian. Okay? Now, the North African just represents the modern mix. Okay? Let's scroll up. I'm sorry. I mean, scroll down. I'm sorry. Okay. All right, so he has a little bit of Arabian Levantine. We're not surprised by that, but what I want the audience to see is that America. There you go. Now, I know it's very tiny, and someone could say, oh, that's nothing. Oh, it is something. because the less miscegenated the Amizigh people are, the more they're inclined to have tiny, tiny Native American and Austronesian markers. Okay? Now, not only have I personally observed that, the owner of Native DNA told me that that is something he has noticed in his samples, that North Africans tend to have tiny Native American markers, and he's not sure why. He thought maybe from the Spaniards slave trading Native Americans, but I know why, and we're going to see why, because there are historians who told us why. Next slide. Okay, this is the same Tunisian, and he did My Heritage. So I want you to see, you see he has the Nigerian, he gets a little Somalian. Some of us get that Somalian too. Of course, he has a large amount of North African because that's where he's from, and that's his current genetic group, which is nothing but a group that's created from the same people mixing among 300 years. So now that's labeled North Africa, and it's just a title. But notice he gets that Kenyan, that's the Bantu, because My Heritage uses Kenya. Ancestry uses Cameroon, Congo. 23andMe uses Angola, Congo, and also Southeast Africa. The Bantu being present, the Nigerian being present, and if he were less miscegenated, you would see Ghana or Mende or Sierra Leone. And I believe here, and yes, if my memory serves me correct, with the My Heritage, they don't use Ghana, they use the Sierra Leone. Okay, so that's what shows. But notice here at that Filipino, that's what we get. And notice he gets it too. Okay, pay attention to that. So how is an individual from North Africa, an Amizigh, which is what he is, how is he getting these tiny Filipino on one test, Native American on another? And I just told you with the founder of Native DNA told me. So that's not just me saying this. This is someone who's an expert saying that, yes, a lot of North Africans get tiny Native American in their DNA. Okay, next slide. I'm gonna tell you why. Can you go to the next slide? I want to see who this is. My memory. Okay. All right, I know who it is. All right. Okay, so we're going to get to the explanation, but I want to show the similarity. So this is a person whose father, this is an individual's father's DNA, and then his father actually descends from 2 Tuscarora native chiefs. Okay, so this is a person who's indigenous, and they know they're indigenous, and they got the paper trail. Okay, so he gave me access to his dad's DNA, and I wanted you to see it. Notice the similarity to the Algerian and to the Tunisian, and this is the same pattern that all of us have who are from North America: the Nigerian, the Ghanaian, the Senegambian, and the Congo. The 4 African groups. You will have the Nigerian, the Ghanaian, it could be Sierra Leone on another test, it could be Akan, it could be Mende, okay? Senegambian, Guinean, it very well could be Gambian, depending on the test that they're using. And then you got the Bantu, in this case, Congolese and Southern East Africa, the Bantu group, the 4 African groups. Same pattern as the Amizigh. You can slide down or show the list. Okay. All right. So that's the European DNA, and we're going to get to that because, I don't want to give it away now. We're getting to that. So let's look at what makes his dad indigenous. He's got the Native American. They're calling that indigenous, but those are Mongol migrants. And what makes them indigenous? That Filipino right there. It could have been Indonesia, that Southeast Asian, all of that is Austronesian. He's showing his ancient markers. Okay? Next slide. Now, I'm moving into that. I'm giving you some background because we're going into the Moorish part of our DNA. Okay? I explained the indigenous part, the Bantu and the Austronesian, and how to recognize it on different DNA tests and why you may not see it on Ancestry DNA or other tests, right? Now you know why. Okay, now this is some background information moving into the Moorish side of the DNA. That was one aspect, the Amizag. Okay, now this is an article. You guys can look this up and read it in detail. But this was a 10-year-old girl found in 7th century Kent, England. Okay. And what's significant about her DNA is that most of her DNA, not most, pardon me, backtrack, 33% of her DNA was Isan Yoruba DNA. And the rest was Northern European. And according to the researchers, they speculate that she got that DNA from a full-blooded Isan Yoruba grandfather who held a high position. And this is 7th century England. She was from a noble family. You can read the article later on at your own leisure. Okay. And the reason why I'm showing this is because where you got one Yoruba, you got a whole bunch. That's like seeing a deer. If you see a deer, you best believe there's a family of deer nearby. Okay. Move to the next slide. So, Jack Forbes wrote The American Discovery of Europe. And in this book, he deals with the fact that indigenous people were going for thousands of years into Europe. Algonquians had all kind of trading. They had elaborate ships. They were navigators, and they had gone into Europe and settled Europe. So we're not surprised when people from Scotland and Ireland, because I look at their DNA tests, I'm in different genetic groups, and they're like, what am I doing with Native American? Even if it's tiny DNA, what am I doing with this kind of DNA, oceanic DNA? Because the people were there, the people were going there. Now, let me just elaborate on that. When they get tiny Native American markers, it's not because the Mongols themselves were going there. It was because we were going there, because the Algonquians, which is a big component of our people, so-called Afro-Americans, our ancestors had already mixed with Asiatic descendants. Remember, the Asiatic people, the proto-Mongoloids, came into North America 10,000 years ago. So they have been here for a minute. They have been here. So it's hard to escape some mixing. Even if we warred, we mixed, we fought, we separated, and that went on for generations and generations. So of course, we will have a little bit of their DNA. And then as we go into different territories, we carry those tiny bit of markers as well. Okay, so that's literature dealing with indigenous people, Algonquians among them, who were sea navigators, and they went into Europe and different places like that thousands of years ago. Next slide. Okay, that's another resource that's very important. It is written in French. You can use Google Translate. It's a bit tedious, but I will tell you that's an anthropological study that was written talking about pre-Islamic Berbers coming into North America and mixing with the tribes on the Atlantic and mixing with tribes in the South America and Caribbean. So there was a back and forth. We went over there, they came over here. So there's a lot of mixing with the Berbers. And the Berbers correctly are termed Amizigh people. And they use that term in this book as well, Amizigh. Okay, so historians talked about this. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so you have David McRitchie, who talked about copper-colored race coming into the Mediterranean and North Africa. And I have to tell you, when I went to Egypt years ago, I noticed a lot of those Nubians had almond-shaped eyes and a ruddy red complexion underneath. So I could actually see it. And I have noticed some Moroccans have that look, almond-shaped eyes. They can pass for tribal members. You know, the kinky hair, the almond-shaped eyes, the red undertones. Absolutely. So that was mentioned in the book Ancient and Modern Britons. You can go to the next slide, by David McRitchie. And I screenshot, let me read it. In addition to the black or brown and yellow races already spoken of as prehistoric Europeans, there is a theory that a copper-colored race closely akin to where am I? To some branches of American Indians once inhabited Europe, or rather the southern parts of Europe and North Africa. We can see that in genetic tests. Even some of the Southern Europeans will have tiny Native American markers as well, and they don't understand where that's coming from. Okay? Next slide. You can enlarge that. So I'm just giving background information as to why we see the things that we see. And I have to apologize where I screenshot that from, but this is what I wanted to focus on, is that second paragraph. Mary, a Negro, arrived from England aboard the ship Margaret. She was brought to work on the same plantation as Antonio, where she was the only woman. And Antonio and Mary married and lived together for more than 40 years. Sometime after 1635, Antonio and Mary gained their freedom from indenture. Antonio changed his name to Anthony Johnson. Johnson first enters the legal record as a free man when he purchased a calf in 1647. Johnson was granted a large plot of farmland after he paid off his indentured contract by his labor. I'll stop right there. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because oftentimes they would tell you these people that came into the colonies were from Africa. They may be of African descent in terms of their ancestral composition, but they are not from Africa. This is one of the sources that literally will admit they were from Europe. They were from England, to be exact, okay? And what I'm going to show is that the Moorish part of us came from Europe and not Africa, and I'm going to show it genetically. Move to the next slide.
Uh-oh.
So if anybody's interested, you can write this down and read the details for yourself. But I'm just showing evidence first before I get to the genetic evidence. So this is a journal, And in this journal, African Slaves in Colonial Australia, it's even an Australian journal of all places. Okay, so this was a find that a friend of mine, she was just looking and she found this. And in this article, they talk about how you had some people sent from England as black slaves that were sent from England, some of them prisoners, and they were sent to work in Australia, okay, as slaves or indentured, I should say. But it was something else in the article that I wanted to take note of. So move to the next slide, please. All right. This is a snippet in that article. Thousands of black families had been living in England for hundreds of years as slaves and as free men. By the late 1500s, there were so many Africans in London that Queen Elizabeth I passed the draft proclamation of 1601 to stop further African immigration. Now, let me just say this before I finish reading it. During this period, and I have other articles to prove it, I just did not have time to keep putting the proof up. There was a large amount of Iberian Moors, because that's who these Africans are, okay? They're Moors. Let's be clear. There was a large amount of Iberian Moors that left the Iberian Peninsula during the period of the Inquisition, and they had gone to London. And if you take it back, remember I showed that article on the young girl with the Isan Yoruba DNA, where they clearly stated that it was from her grandfather, who was a noble. So understand that in England, you had a population that was already there for generations. And I'm saying, now someone could say, well, they were there from ancient times. There were different types of people. The West Africans came there. The people that we're calling Yoruba, or who have the Nigerian DNA, that DNA came there from the Roman Empire. And I just want your audience to keep that in the head. Roman Empire, okay? And then you also had Moors running in there from the Iberian Peninsula. Now, before I finish reading, Iberian Moors are genetically similar and the same people as the people in North Africa. In fact, in 711, when the Moors from North Africa ran into the Iberian Peninsula, the biggest constituent were of the Zenata and the Sanhanja tribe out of Algeria. And I showed you what the Algerian composition looked like. That individual is mixed now, and you saw the truth inside of his DNA. And Tunisian, he's also an Amizigh, okay? Keep that in mind. So let me finish reading this. For those who remained in London after the 1600s, life was not easy. In 1786, the plight of the African English was so bad that £900 was donated by the Committee for the Relief of the Black Poor. Destitute, some turned to crime to eat. They were duly arrested and sentenced to the colonies. These poor people went from slavery to penal servitude. They are telling you here that they sent them to the colonies. That's right here. But I'm going to show it genetically. Move to the next slide, please. But I'm giving you some background information. So again, you can write this down and read the details. So this is an article based on something that happened. An Irish slave in Antigua, the West Indies. This is what they call a mulatto, and he's from Ireland, and he was captured and enslaved and brought to Antigua and fought for his freedom. And he was returned to Ireland. Okay. Now, the only reason I'm showing this is because when you see one deer, there's a whole lot of deer. And that's why I'm showing this. If they admitted this for one person, trust and believe this happened to a whole lot of people that look just like him. He didn't get mulatto by himself. Okay. Next slide. Okay. So I'm just going to slightly deviate a little bit. All right. So when people talk about West Africans, a lot of people don't know. West Africans are new to West Africa. The Senegambian, all of those tribes, the Ghanaians, who are, by the way, distantly related to the Senegambians, these people all broke off from each other, okay? Then you have the Nigerian. Now, I'm going to tell you, before I explain this slide, that geneticists break West Africa genetically into two founder groups, and that's the Mandinka and the Yoruba, okay? Meaning that what you see today are different tribes, ethnicities, but they all converge to those people. So on one DNA test, you may see Gambian. One DNA test, you may see Mandinka, Senegambian. All of those people converge back to under a group, Mandi-speaking people. Now, people from Ghana who are Akans, they are distantly related to the Mandi-speaking people. Remember, they become their own genetic communities over time as they break away and they start mixing and mingling among themselves and intermingling with groups that they found there. So they take on their own, they create their own genetic signatures. But trust and believe that all of West Africa to North Africa come from two families, Mandi, Mandinka, and Yoruba. Okay. Now, where did they migrate from? Well, if you listen to the oral history of West Africans, different West Africans, if they know oral history, they will tell you they migrated from the north and from the northeast. And now that many West Africans are participating, the DNA tests support that. So the same way the DNA supports our being indigenous, DNA supports their oral history. So I'm going to show you here, using the Lebanese sample again. If you look at his GEDmatch using the Oracle, the Punt DNA 15, if we zoom in on his secondary populations, now the first one on the left is what he is, mixed with now Cypriot, which is Cyprus, Little North African, Libya, Druze, Samaritan. These are pretty much what he is now. Let's look at his founder populations. Let's zoom in on his secondary populations, okay? We're getting towards the end, by the way. Are you able to enlarge that? Okay. All right. So you got the Egyptian, the Turk, the Yemen, the Levant, the Mozambique. This is the part. See that? We're going to start right here. See that African American? That doesn't surprise me because Lebanese people, modern Lebanese, are the direct descendants of the ancient Phoenicians. The bones that they dug up of the ancient Phoenicians, modern Lebanese people match the ancient bones the closest more than any population on the planet today. It is just that through invasions, one after the next, today when you see them, they are no longer dark, but their most ancient ancestors were dark. In fact, the sculptures of Phoenicians, when you go into the souvenir shops, are all tall black men with skirts on, with long arms and long legs. Now, if you look there, you see African American. Well, I'm not surprised, because what I found out was that the ancient home of the Phoenicians was not Lebanon, that they settled in Lebanon, but that they had another home that was ancient. And from what I'm being told, no one tells them what that ancient home is. But Canaanites and Semites are said to originate in the Americas. And the reason why I believe it, because when I break down his DNA and I uploaded it to an archaeogenetic site, he matches the Afro-American population in the Philadelphia, what the Philadelphia cholera, the Delaware so-called slave, which is nothing but a American Indian on My True Ancestry, and he gets the Afro-American population that shows right up in his secondary population. And he gets tiny Siberian as well. So that lets me know he has some ancestors that were in North America. Not to mention, I won't call her name, but she's a mutual friend of yours as well, Amico. And when I looked at her Jed match, she literally gets Lebanese, modern Lebanese in some of her secondary populations. And I showed it to her because she has high Tigray Ethiopian, and they are closest to the Tigray Ethiopians in their purest form, Lebanese people, but they're now highly miscegenated. So let's go down and look. And you see here African American. You see, no, stay right there. African American. You see Puerto Rican. You see Bamon. Those are people from Cameroon, a tribe from Cameroon. You see Hausa, those Afro-Chadic tribe that's in North. They're really there in a lot of places. They're even as far east as Sudan, northern Nigeria, Chad, northern Ghana, northern Cameroon. I mean, they're a very large tribe. Then you got the Bambara, who's from Mali. That's a large tribe from Mali. Now, mind you, now this is a man from the Levant, Lebanon. You got the Brong. The Brong are related to the Ashantis. They are an Akan-speaking people. Then you got the Yoruba. A lot of us heard of who they are, from Nigeria. Then you had the Igbo people, who are from Southeast Nigeria. Then you have the Mandinka, who are really literally modern Mandinkas are from Gambia, Senegal, Guinea-Bissau. Then you have Northeast Bantu. So what does this tell you? That tells you that West Africans came from the Levant. They came from other areas as well, but a large part of their lineage came from the Levant. That's what I want your audience to see. And the reason why I want you to see that, because when you start talking about Roman Empire, understand that the Roman Empire included that whole area, the Levant, North Africa, and this will explain why Africans found themselves in Northern Europe, Northwest Europe, and they had matches such as the one we're seeing there. That's why I'm showing this. I'm giving a historical context to the genetic findings. Next slide. So this is my sample from a man from Montserrat. And why am I showing this? This is a very, very important slide because Montserrat is a very tiny island. And if you understand their history, They are extremely Irish in terms of their culture, their history, and they are very heavily melanated. Now, in Montserrat, by the 1700s, almost 70% of their slave population was Irish. Now, that's what's written. They don't tell you if they were white, they don't tell you if they were black, but what they want you to assume is that they were white. Okay? Now, when you go to Montserrat today, you don't really see anybody white. Most of them are brown to dark. Occasionally, you see someone fair, but it is a very melanated country. You do not find any African loan words. You do not find any history of descending from any enslaved Africans. They just bought into the lie that we must have come from Africa. But when you speak to anybody born and raised from Montserrat, they will always talk about Irish, 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 Irish. Their national dish is goat water, which is a rendition of an Irish stew, a goat stew. Their slave rebellion was on St. Patrick's Day. So their St. Patrick's Day, I understand, is so huge that the people from Ireland go to Montserrat to celebrate it. Okay? So if there's any Black Irish in a concentrated place, it would be Montserrat. So I was always desirous of that DNA because they are not mixed with other groups as much. They're not pure either. But put it this way, whatever genetic findings you see there, I can bet my last dollar it is a signature of the Blackamoors that were expelled out of Ireland. So the reason why I zoomed in on Montserrat was that strong connection to Ireland, the heavy slave trafficking of Blackamoors from Ireland, and the fact that they're very Irish culturally. And I always knew, but I wanted to prove genetically that this Igbo assignment that we are getting from America to the Caribbean, in fact, was nothing but a signal of the Moors that came out of the Celtic countries, Scotland and Ireland. Because what I started noticing was that people who had a decent amount of Irish and Scottish DNA, they also had a tendency to have Igbo matching. And bear in mind that matching to Ireland and Scotland and England or any European nation today is a reflection of the people that's there now. But using common sense, I know that if Blackamoors lived there, there had to be some intermixing with the newcomers that came in, because the paler people are newcomers, but they didn't just get there. So there was plenty of time for those two populations to mix. So we gave them some of our DNA and we took some of theirs. So what I learned was that the European DNA, which reflects the population that's there now, was a stamp, a footprint to where our Moorish ancestors came from, because we today genetically are a composite of both indigenous Americans, and this what I'm saying applies to both North Americans and Caribbean people, and Moors. Some of us are more Moorish. It depends on that family. Some of us are more indigenous. Some of us identify as indigenous. Some of us identify with the African or Moorish side. And that is each individual's decision, but I'm just here to show. So I want to finish. Now, if you look, you will see he matches Igbo. And I knew he would. I wanted the proof. Okay, but I want to show you something. You see, he has the Senegambian, he has the Congolese, he has the Ghanaian, the Nigerian. That is a Moorish Amazigh pattern, but he just has a high preponderance of Nigerian Igbo DNA because that DNA now is found in southeast Nigeria. You know, I didn't think to do it, but if you looked at his timeline, and I was rushing, but if you looked at his timeline, you would have seen that his earliest DNA was Senegambian, and it was basically the North African Amazigh. And the last DNA that came in was his Igbo. And you would say, well, why? Because as I said before, those West Africans came from the Roman Empire. And I will show a little bit, we're almost done, why I'm saying that. Can we show a little bit more of his DNA? I think yeah, slide up. So yeah, you were going to, no. You're going, there you go up. There you go. There we are. Just zoom in on that. So this is some more of this same individual's DNA, the Montserrat man. So you can see here he matches Igbo regions in southeast Nigeria. Okay, that's all it's showing. All right, but his ancestors are not from Nigeria. Okay, let's see the other part of his DNA. All right. So this is where his Irish ancestors come from. His Blackamoor ancestors come from. Now, they want people to believe, oh, this is his white ancestry that comes from there. That's not just his white ancestors who come from there. How did they know his ancestors came from these regions? They literally are telling you the regions. That's because there are relatives of his that are still left back there. They tell you, let's read it. You are connected through shared ancestors to people from Connacht, Leinster, and Munster, and Central and Southern Ireland. That is how they know where his Blackamoor ancestors come from, because the people that are left back there are his cousins. Okay? All right, let's move. And of course, he has some matching to the United Kingdom as well, because there was DNA going back and forth from Ireland and certain parts of the United Kingdom, particularly the western portions. Okay, you can, I think that's his slide. All right. Now, before I deal with this individual, let me say something about his. And I looked at his DNA very, very detailed. I uploaded it to GEDmatch. He did not have any of the Austronesian markers. He didn't have any of the Native American markers. And now let me say something, because this applies to the Caribbean people. You will not see Austronesian markers as a definite trait with people from the Caribbean. Why? Because they were in the Caribbean from ancient times. And if you look at the map, we received those markers from the Pacific. So if you look, the land masses barricaded. So that's just pure geography. But what you will notice when you look at many Caribbean people's results, they have a high Bantu, I say that in quotes, percentage, but not all of them. And with the sample we just discussed with the Montserrat, I will tell you his Bantu wasn't even all that high. He just had a little bit, which would have been expected of a Berber, okay? And a great deal of his lineage primarily is Moorish. And he's a good example of being indigenous to America does not apply to him. I would say the majority of the Caribbean, absolutely, it applies to them. But that particular individual, no. That's a descendant of a blackamoor from Ireland. Okay, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, using what we learned, and being that we have now seen a descendant of a Irish blackamoor living in Montserrat, let's apply the same rules here. Okay, this is a cousin of mine. This is a second cousin. She's really my mom and my uncle's cousin. Okay, now looking at her DNA, now we're applying everything that we learned. She has the 4 African groups: the Nigerian, the Ghanaian, it could be Sierra Leone on different tests, Mende, again, Senegambian, then the Bantu, the Congo, okay, and Southeast Africa. That's Bantu, the 4 African groups. And I said 4 simultaneous African groups has a Ami Zag pattern. All right, let's zoom in and look. We're nearing the end. So if you look in, you see they give specifics about her DNA. Oyo is a subgroup of the Yoruba people, okay? And you see Liberia for Ghana because we have matches to the Mende. So do Amizigh people. So I'm not surprised, and you find them in Liberia, okay? So you can go on, we can finish analyzing her DNA. All right. So same rules apply to her, applied to the man from Montserrat. So where did her Moorish ancestors come from? Let's look. United Kingdom, Glasgow City, and Ireland. And that makes sense because when you look at the breakdown, and I hope I shared it, she had matches to the Igbo. Glasgow City is outside of London, and that doesn't surprise me because Yoruba type DNA was well established there from Roman times. And if people are already established, they're less inclined to be in the city. They will be more inclined to be outside on the outskirts of the city. So that doesn't surprise me that she has more relatives remaining outside of London, but in the United Kingdom. And she also has some matches to Ireland because she gets the Igbo. So she gets the Yoruba, which lines up with Kent century England, Isan Yoruba, Kent, okay, England. And she also gets a little bit of the Southern European, which is because I analyzed the DNA that was mixed in with Gambian, which is Moor, who was in, Moorish Italy, because the Moors were all over. So that doesn't surprise me. And many of them ran into England. So you had that whole big mix. Let's move and look at the rest of her DNA. So now this shows that a great bulk of her lineage is indigenous. Again, we're looking at the Austronesian, that Indonesian, Thai, Khmer, Myanmar, Filipino Austronesian. Let's finish looking at it. And then you got the indigenous American, which is not indigenous, it's native, what they call, which is the Mongol migrants that came in, but they're mislabeling it indigenous, okay? They have been here ancient. I'm not disrespecting them. They've been here thousands of years, but they were not here longer than us. We have been here longer than them. That's why we have their DNA. They came in on us, okay? Is there anything after this?
No, that's the end right there. That
All
was
right.
very powerful.
I hope, that I illustrated the very basic breakdown of our DNA. Basically, I divided our DNA. We're a composite of 2 people. I'm speaking of us as in general, Caribbeans and Afro-American people. We're a combination of the Moors and we're a combination of indigenous Americans. I think a lot of the conflict that some of us have with people's choice of identity is a spiritual one. how people choose to identify is a very individual decision, and I think it has spiritual origins. Personally, it's also social, how one was raised, how one was socialized. If you came out of a home, I've met people who grew up identified with the Moorish movement. Their fathers were Moors, their mothers was Moors, and so I mean, it's not as if they reject what I'm saying, but that's their primary identity. So, and then there are people that's just what they feel closest to. There are people I've met from the Caribbean, in my opinion, I find them quite European. They're not trying to be, they just are, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they have an ancient bloodline to the Americas, So my whole point in teaching this is that I don't like to see our people tricked and fooled by DNA. I think if you understand it, it proves, if anything, that you are ancient here. And what it actually proves is that you are descendant from the Moors of Europe. I'm not saying that there was not a transatlantic slave trade, but I will tell you that most of what came in from straight from Africa was really Atlantic Creoles. You guys should write that word down, Atlantic Creoles. There's a good write-up about them on Wikipedia. I call it 95% true, 5% lie, because 95% of it is true, because what they describe is that there were strategic areas on the coastline of the African continent, and the Pale Europeans formed a coalition with African chiefs on those strategic areas, and there was intermingling, marrying their daughters, creating Creole mixed societies who understood both the African culture and the European culture, and they were well versed in both languages. And these particular points served as stopping stations for the ships that left Liverpool, Bristol, and all these places. You understand? Now, that was not the only way we got here, because you had pirates. And a lot of people talk about the European slave trade, and being kidnapped by pirates. Let me tell you something, and I'm not the one who said this, because I got to give credit where credit is due. Dr. Tracy McCarthy actually put that together through her own research. And she has a YouTube, Dr. Tracy McCarthy, Tracey McCarthy. You can look at her YouTube, and she deals with that European slave trade, where they talk about all these Europeans being kidnapped, was happening around the same time that we were enslaved here in the colonies. Now think about it. Why did they allow that to happen? And they claim these pirates were bringing them to North Africa. Well, why is it when I look at North African DNA, they don't have DNA from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, but we do?
Exactly.
So those pirates were nothing but rogue North African Berbers who were getting paid to kidnap blackamoors from all these parts and bring them into Antigua, Jamaica, Barbados, Virginia, South Carolina, you name it. That's what they were getting paid for. And that's why when you read about the Barbary Wars, it was perfect timing. That was two crooks who teamed up together. What was it? Thomas Jefferson was the one during the Barbary Wars, right? That was Thomas Jefferson. He told them, because they were saying, y'all need to hit us up with some more money. That sounds like some typical Pookie stuff to me. They was like, y'all need to hit us up with some more money now. We doing all this kidnapping. And see, the slave system was saturated to their satisfaction. And when they decided we're not paying these North African dudes no more money, that's when they had a war with them. That's all that was. They was not going to pay them any more money because they didn't need them anymore. And just right then, that's when they outlawed importation, because they already cleaned Europe. Europe said, okay, we got them out. The United States said, all right, we cleaned them out and we got them here. And that's it. We don't need no more of them here because they already gone. And they basically gave the middle finger to the pirates and went to war and said, we ain't paying y'all nothing. Not anymore. And if you look, now I forgot, but you can look this up. If you look and see how much they were paying them, anyway. And when you look and read about Irish slavery and you read the numbers, like 300,000 Irish slaves. I mean, just when you read the amount of numbers, I mean, who were these people? These were the blackamoors. This is why we get these matches to Ireland and Scotland. Literally, our cousins are still there. They just whitened up. That's all they did. And this also explains why many of us have white American cousins and we can't seem to figure out where are our common ancestors, but we know we related to them because they right there, 4 to 6. You know where we related to them? Many of them we're related to back in Europe. We're either related to them through the first set of indentured servants that came in, who were, by the way, they were Antonio Johnson and those guys, the ones that came in the 1600s, they were not the Anglo-Moors. They, in fact, were the Iberian Moors descendants who ran in to England. This is why we get a little bit of Portuguese DNA and DNA from Spain. We get it from those initial guys that came in because they had those DNA markers from the Iberian Peninsula. This is exactly why we get that Iberian. That's why we also get matches to the Balkan. Some of you guys are probably wondering, well, where am I getting this Balkan and Greek DNA and the stuff showing this, all this weird stuff and Roma Gypsy now, and it might even say North India, Pakistan. You want to know where all of that came from? Ashkenazi Jewish. It didn't happen in the colonies. This all happened in Europe. You had a large population of Lascars who were South Asian and Southeast Asian seamen who were very good at navigation. By the 1600s, the British Empire incorporated and extended all the way into Asia, and they took on the services of men from South Asia, including Somaliland. And these men were known for their navigational skills because many of the paler Europeans, were getting sick going into tropical areas and they couldn't keep them. So that is exactly how empires work. They basically enlist the services of even people that they oppress, and it allows them to execute their objective. So you had a number of Lascars who were living in England. In fact, many of them were being discriminated against. But you had the Lascars, you already had a large populations of Roma Gypsies who were already there for a couple of thousand years. And you had the Blackamoors who were already there from the Roman times. Then you had the Moors that already ran in during the Inquisition. And you had all these people living together in England, and you had Ashkenazi Jews who were running as well. And they were all living there. It was a port city, so you had a mixture of people. And this is where that DNA comes from. And the reason why the reason why I can prove that, which it would have been too exhaustive to show here, is through a sequencing app called sequencing.com. And when you look at when these DNA markers came together, they all came together in many of our DNA at the same time the British DNA came in. That's what sequencing does. It allows you to look at when the markers came in relation to each other. So when I look at a lot of our DNA, I notice I look for the British, or you can look for the Utah whites, who are the European descendants in Utah, which is a test study group, and they are primarily of English British origin. And when you see them matching, you also notice you see adjacent in your DNA Balkan, Greek, that's Roma Gypsy, because they're primarily Balkan, mixed with North India, Pakistan, Afghanistan. You see South Asian matches, also even Southern India, Nepal, Bangladesh. What's all of that? That's the Lascars, because the Lascars were taking pale European English wives. They were having children, and
Hey, doctor.
all of that mixing was taking place with Ashkenazi Jewish, all these people. And guess what? When they came into the colonies as black slaves, they carried that DNA from England with them. That's why we get it.
Hey, doctor, I have a question. Something
Yes,
you just said. That's perfect what you just said. Because I remember you went into this. You said the Lascars. Isn't that, doesn't that ring a bell with the North Carolina, that thing about the ancient Berbers being slaves?
yes. And I'm glad you brought it up. You're stealing my thunder. But anyway, yes, exactly. And that's a perfect segue into that. The South Carolina, what is it? The 1840 South Carolina slave law. This is
Yes.
exactly why it says what it says. Because if you read it, it says that, let me put, let's pull it up. Let's read it.
Okay.
Um,
Oh, you
because
got it, or you want me? You want me to?
um, you can, I'm looking at it on Google.
Okay, that's cool.
Because understanding this explains it, because you will not fully understand that law if you don't understand what you're looking at. Are you able to show it on the screen?
Yeah, I'm about to pull it up to the screen.
Oh, okay, that's perfect.
Let me see if I can get it. Let's see. Ancient Berbers. Let's see. Hmm. You're talking about the what is it, 1790? Not
Uh-uh.
that one.
It's an 1840 South Carolina slave law.
1840,
Mm-hmm.
the South Carolina slave law. Okay. It's not fully coming up for me. Let me
Right
see.
here, I'm gonna get it for you. When I find it, can I screenshot it to you, to your
Yeah,
messenger?
of course.
I might have the year off, don't, but I'm gonna get it. Just bear with me less than a minute.
I'm sorry, what you say? Doctor. I think this might be it right here. I think I got it. I vaguely hear you. I don't
Oh, I'm
can't hear
sorry.
you.
I was grabbing.
Oh, okay.
I was
Okay.
grabbing some water.
Okay, okay.
All right,
Sorry
you
about
got it.
it's loading up. I think this just might be it.
Mhm.
I have it on my other computer. I thought it was on this one, but it's not.
1740, I think. I found it. If you didn't get it, I got it.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Wait, hold
Send it
on.
right over and I'll upload it.
Wait, hold on now. All right, hold on. No, wait. That's what I had.
Mm,
Any other time, I would have known it right off top of my head.
just gotta please be it. it's still low. It's a big
Oh,
file.
I found it.
Oh, you got it? Okay, perfect.
It's the Negro Law of South Carolina.
Yeah, because that's a very good point. That's you about to bring out. It's a very good point.
And it's the section 4. You want to pull that up?
Section 4, let's say. Okay. Yep, right here. Let's go. Let's go. Let me share the screen again. Screen share. And we should have it right here. Yep. Boom. There it is. Can you see that?
Yes. And plus I have it.
Okay.
All right. The term Negro is confined to slave African, the ancient Berbers and their descendants. It does not embrace the free inhabitants of Africa, such as the Egyptians, Moors, or the Negro Asiatic, such as Lascars. Now, why are they mentioning these people? They are mentioning them because guess what? Every last one of them was in England. When you look at the sequencing genetically, you will see Yemen, Egypt, and I'm talking about in the modern sense, okay? We know that these populations were anciently melanated and indistinguishable from adjacent Black nations. But in a modern sense, they were living, mixing, and in those areas, all right? And you had Lascars, like I said, in Europe, living in England, living in particularly London, okay, where there was a population of them. They were marrying pale English women. You had also Lascars who were Southeast Asian as well. And you also had Somalis who were part of the British naval force, who were sailors, and they're African. And the reason why they have to state that, because they were after one group of people. They weren't after those people. By the way, they were being discriminated against. I read Lascars were facing discrimination in England, okay? But you had some of them that came here. Their descendants. Some of these people came here. And if you do genealogy and you read the work of Paul Heinig, the Weaver family in particular are descendants of East Indian indentured servants. And they'll tell you when you go to Paul Heinig's work and you read the Free African Americans, and he has different sections, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. You can get it right on the internet. You don't even have to order the book. He'll tell you that the East Indian indentured servants were from England. So they were from England, but not the blacks that were indentured. Oh, come on. So that this law is very personal. This is a very personal law because even though they were discriminatory against anyone that was melanated, they wanted it known. You're a lifetime slave, and we're after one group of people, the descendants of the ancient Berbers. Now, when you look at the genetic breakdown of people, even when they come from Scotland, when I talk about the Irish Blackamoors, they still have a Berber pattern. Understand that. Because Berbers or Amazigh people inhabited all of those areas, but later on, during the Roman Empire, you had additional West African type genetics coming in. And I say West African type because they did not come from West Africa up to Europe. They actually came from the Middle East. And this is why I showed the gentleman from Lebanon, his earlier populations were Igbo, Brong, which is an Akan group from Ghana. Or I wanted you to see that those people were anciently there and the Roman Empire included that area. Now, going back to this is a very personal law because they want one group of people enslaved, and that is the people who were there, who were the Moors.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who they are after. And the question becomes, we can have a discussion. Why did they want them enslaved? That's a very personal law.
Hey,
So,
doctor.
yes.
Sorry to cut your wisdom. We have a question from Mr. Lawrence Turner. It's actually a very good question. He's saying, "Greetings, doctor. I have a bloodline to Queen Elizabeth and the Stuarts. So this is a direct result of Moors."
Absolutely. So even though Queen Elizabeth was talking about in 1601, get these neggers and blackamoors up out of here, she was under pressure.
Mm.
She had Moorish blood, and they were whitening up. They were at that point they started whitening up. But you can look at the picture of Henry Stuart, the less doctored up one. He had an afro.
Yeah, that's true.
Even Henry VIII. I mean, as horrible as he was, who wants to claim him? But he still had an afro as a kid. They were starting to miscegenate. Moors do that. They jump in and out. They whiten up, they blacken up. So when you're dealing with a pale European, you're dealing with a whitened up Moor. That's why we all have cousins back there. They're just whitened up Moors. That's all they are.
Hey, um, do you want to finish this right, or are you done on the statute, or do you want to go into questions and answers?
I mean, I'm finished because I think I finished the presentation. I mean,
No, I meant like the statutes, the Negro law.
oh, because that's what I was dealing with. I was dealing with okay, if you want to deal with okay, number three, Indians. Okay, yeah, it's important. Number three, Indians and the descendants of Indians are regarded as free in amity with the government until the contrary be shown. So, yeah, if you're down with us and you allow us to be here and you capture, and if you understand to be free meant that you had a treaty with them and you meant you captured some blackamoors, Africans who are really the blackamoors. You have to understand that even though they did our indigenous ancestors dirty, this was very personal. That's why when people just say, oh, slavery was just about money, no, it wasn't. I'm not saying it wasn't about money, but it was also very personal. These people were very contemptuous and very angry because their rulers were the blackamoors. They were very angry with them. The Moors were their rulers. It was jealousy, sexual competition. There was a lot of stuff going on.
Most definitely, it was a lot of stuff going on. I have a list of questions myself. I'm not sure if anybody else have questions, so I want to wait until everybody else get their questions answered because I got a lot of questions. But does anybody have any questions in the chat? We have quite a few people here. Like I said, this was a powerful build. Doctor, you have a lot of people here listening to you. There's over 2,000 people here.
Are you serious?
I am really serious.
I'm
It's
glad,
over.
I'm glad you didn't tell me that earlier.
I didn't want to scare you or nothing like that, but
Yeah,
it's
no,
over.
no. Oh man, I'm glad I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's over 2,000 people here. But I want to say thank you to everybody listening. Everybody that's sharing, liking, subscribing. Definitely appreciate that. But does anybody have any questions? You can put it in the chat. I'll put it up on the big screen, and then I'm sure the doctor will answer it. I'm sure Miss Phoenix has a couple questions as well. Do
Mhm.
you? I don't even know. She probably didn't even hear me.
No, yes, I'm here. I have some questions.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't see anybody in the chat asking questions or anything like that. Right.
Yeah, I
So
was
would you like
waiting
to go
to
first?
see. So, I've just recently done or had my let's say genealogy, but my DNA done, and I found that I do have some Moorish descent, a lot of European stuff, but I also have like some stuff from Barbados.
Mhm.
How does that all tie in with what you were discussing as far as the DNA and how it's the ancient DNA and all of that? How does it tie into the Bantu and all of that?
Well, I mean, you had the American Indian slave trade. So you
Mm-hmm.
had indigenous people being taken to Barbados. As a matter of fact, during the Amerindian Wars up and down the east coast of the Atlantic, the men that was not killed, they were taken to Barbados and other Caribbean islands, but Barbados in particular. And then you had indigenous people from Barbados, Arawaks, Caribs, that were taken and brought to the southeast into the colonies. But also bear in mind, you had people that were taken to Barbados, blackamoors, who were taken out of Scotland and Ireland and England, but mainly Scotland and Ireland. And some of them also were traded. That's the real triangular trade. It wasn't just indigenous people. Initially, it was, but then during the wars, during Oliver Cromwell kicking out and enslaving the Irish, then you had the British Civil War. A lot of that, they came into the Caribbean. So some of us get the Blackamoor, the Moorish DNA indirectly. Some of us get it directly, straight out of Europe, and some of us get it indirectly from the Caribbean as well. I don't know if I'm answering your question.
Yes, you did. Also, can you elaborate just a little bit more on the Igbo?
On the Igbo?
Yes.
Well, what in particular would?
Well, just kind of in general, just a little bit. I'm not very familiar with them.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
All right. Well, the Igbo people are one of several ethnicities that's found in southeast Nigeria. They have different states, Imo, Abia, Enugu, and they are. I don't like the word tribe, but let's say they are a large ethnicity, and they're key players in Nigeria today. Well, like a lot of different West African tribes, they also migrated from North and Northeast Africa. They weren't always in their current location. So you will find that many people who have matches to Scotland and Ireland, basically the Celtic areas, they have a tendency to have Igbo matching. So it's not uncommon, since so many blackamoors from Ireland and Scotland went into the Caribbean, and those islands filled up very quickly because they're not large. I mean, Jamaica is the largest of them, so it's not difficult to fill those spaces up with blackamoors. This is why I think that our Caribbean brothers and sisters, some of them, a lot of them, they've maintained that essence of European culture. If you look at the food, even the way they name themselves. I mean, I used to kind of laugh. I mean, names like Fitzroy. I mean, really? I used to chuckle, but they were giving themselves the names that their Moorish ancestors were giving themselves, and they're very European in terms of the things that they eat, and it's reflected in the food that we eat as well. A lot of the food that we call soul food is not all indigenous. I found out even fried chicken is Scottish. Collard greens originates from the Eastern Mediterranean. It's not from a tropical area. It's actually from the Mediterranean. If you research it, uh, organ meats, intestines, chitlins. That's all European food. Anybody from Europe would tell you that. pig's feet, hog head cheese. I know. I'm sorry, but it is what it is. And listen, even jumping the broom is a medieval European uh, cultural practice. And that leads me to say there's a professor who's brilliant named Thomas Sowell, Sowell. You heard of him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Sowell's works is profound. He's actually done studies. You can YouTube his stuff if you don't even want to read it. Just go to YouTube. He's actually done documentaries and studies on so-called African Americans, even our subculture, down to the subversive parts of us, like the hood behavior, down to even Ebonics, what we call Ebonics, Black English, and studied all of this and found out that all of it, every last one of it, was linked to Northwest Europe. Even many of our grandparents and parents playing the bridge. That was a popular game among a lot of Southern so-called African Americans. That was the most common uh, card game that was being played during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I, which was during the same period they started expelling blackamoors out of England. So he studied a lot of our behavior and saw that some of this ghetto hood behavior was traced to the countrysides during that period of Scotland. And here's the thing, many people from Scotland will go under the video, and many Europeans who are from those areas will say, oh my God, he is so correct. We can relate. We have people who act just like that. They say these things that we would commonly say, those of us who speak more Ebonics or Black English, and yet none of this was traced to Africa. Now, Thomas Sowell has to be very careful. He cannot say, because he doesn't want, I guess, lose his credentials. He's not going to say, well, that's because a good portion or of some of the people, and or let's say the so-called African portion of indigenous people, so-called African Americans, come out of Europe. That's why he's not saying that. But if you really read between the lines of what he's saying, he's showing that down to our speech patterns, down to the subversive elements in our behavior, down to what we do as a pastime, the way we chose to marry when we couldn't marry legally in this country, all of it goes back to Europe.
That's true. Hey, to elaborate on something you said about Jamaica, when I went down there, they were telling me that a lot of their culture came from Igbo. They literally said that. Like, not all of them said that, obviously, but
Mhm.
they were saying that their cuisine was from there. They were saying like stuff like their folklores were from there, like their religion, parts of it. They were saying that it was Igbo.
Mhm. Now, what's my answer to that? The reason why I always wanted DNA from a Montserrat individual, I had a reason. I didn't want it from a person from Jamaica. You know why? It's because of what you
The
just said.
black, the black Irish are over there.
That's right. The Black Irish are in Montserrat. And if you go to the slavevoyage.org, you will see that there weren't even a good 10 ships that landed in Montserrat, and there were maybe they were from like Gambia and places like that. And I mean, there was nothing coming from Nigeria regions, and it was only maybe about 10 ships. You can go and double check this. So I deliberately picked Montserrat because there was no trading at all from Africa. And therefore, it was used for me as a reference. Now, I'm going to go to Jamaica and I'm going to deal with what you're saying. The reality is that there was some direct trading with Africa, and that's a good example. But here's what I think. I question whether that was from a slave trade or pre-Columbian, because my understanding is that and I learned this from someone who was actually a Maroon. He said that one of his elders told him that she was taught by her elders that before Columbus came, West African men came in boats frequently and traded and came there. And if you look at the currents going back and forth from that area of West Africa, is very feasible. I don't personally think it's from a slave trade, and that's not discounting the slave trade, but we know that of all the imported slaves that went into Jamaica, only 7.8% directly came from Africa. So that Igbo mention is not, I'm not convinced that's from a slave trade. I'm convinced that it
Well,
was
even
pre-Columbian. That's just my feeling. But even if you want to argue that it's from a slave trade, it is because that particular island is in the west part of the Antilles. And if you think about it, if you're coming from further west, like a place like Africa, that would be an island that they would be more inclined to stop. And I do know they just have lineage coming from different directions, just like you saw with the Jamaican gentleman that I used earlier, and I showed you in his jet match. He had Lumbee. He showed the DNA even coming from us. So I already knew that Jamaicans, Asians, and many of the other Caribbean people are very miscegenated. So it's a toss-up what you can find. And yes, one could argue that in fact a lot of Igbo people did directly go there because they do have some Igbo loan words in patois. So that is a valid argument, but there's no argument with the Montserrat. And that's why I wanted his DNA. Because when you start looking at places like Antigua, and you start looking at people in South Carolina and people in Virginia, and when you start looking at people who know that they're indigenous and they literally descend from two Tuscarora chiefs, and they're getting Igbo, something is wrong. It can't be from a slave trade. Oh, I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. My bad.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you think that, okay, with all the information that we have via the DNA, because this is evidence, like no doubt, do you think that this could be, this information that we have, we could use it as prima facie evidence to establish our own political party or nation upon our own land?
I think we could.
I believe so. Because
Yeah,
it still doesn't use solely claim and they use singleness.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? I know the brother Natural had a question.
there
There's
was,
a
I'm
speak-
sorry, there was a couple in the
in the chat.
comments.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how she feel about this, and we'll get to Natural after this, but did a Lumbee trace to King David? And he also asks if the Igbo are Israelites from the Bible.
I answered that question for him in the chat, but if she would like to elaborate, then that's fine. That's perfect.
Okay, so what's the first the Igbo? Should I answer that? What was the Lembo? Was the first question?
Mhm.
Okay.
Did the Limbo trace to King David?
I know that the Limba's oral history is that they migrated down from Yemen and that they came from Israel. So if that's King David, I guess so. But I know that they migrated out of the area of Israel, and they have a genetic pattern that supports that, and they migrated down from Yemen, and it's supported by their DNA patterns. So oral history and DNA converge with them. The Igbo are Israelites from the Bible? That's a good question. I don't think the Igbo are any more Israelites than anybody else that showed up in the secondary populations of the Lebanese. I think that the claim to I are they the Israelites from the Bible? Yeah, I think they are. I think that they are because all of these people are found. There's evidence that they came out of the Levant area, and many of them are saying that they are because of their practices, the circumcision 8 days for a boy after the baby's born, um, their customs,
Mhm.
levirate type marriages, or if a widow, if a woman is widowed, their ancestors did this. The brother, her deceased husband's brother, would marry her. I mean, this is all found in the book of Leviticus. But they're not the only ones that do this. I mean, you have people from the Congo that also do that. Um, you also have oral history from the God people who say that they came out of the Levant area. And actually, there was a man named, I forgot his name. He was a Minister Thomas Odimba, Odimba, Thomas Odimba, YouTube. He literally has like several videos where he's speaking French, but it's translated in English. Someone translates verbally in English, and he's giving you the migration of the Israelites into the interior of Africa. And he says you could tell by their names. And he talks about like Dakar comes from Dakar. He talks about Abuja is from Abijah, which is a Hebrew name. He literally correlates the names and how many of those names are still found in those tribes. And it is. And I have seen evidence of it, not because he said it, it's just because I have, even though I'm not fluent in my father's language, I've read enough and I recognize it. Even when I see some Ghanaians, they have last names like Debra, that's from Deborah. I recognize it. Even my real surname, um, like names like um, Salome for the Aways. I've seen names like what's the man? What's the name of the? Uh, this is literally a patient literally came in with this last name, Manasseh. He literally came in with he's from Ghana, Manasseh. I see it. I don't discuss it with them. I see it, and when you speak to many uh, Africans, it's not far fetched to them because the older ones will tell you we migrated from the north and the east, and our history is ancient. I don't. But to answer that question, the Igbo, the Yoruba, and all of them, they came out of the Roman Empire, and that's how they ended up in Europe, and they migrated out of the area of Northeast Africa and Levant area, and that's why when you look at their DNA, they all have Near East and Red Sea, by the way. If you look at any West African's DNA and you upload it to GEDmatch, they all have a decent percentage of Northeast African, Red Sea, which incorporates the area of Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Sudan, and current day Egypt. And they all have Near East. So they're, they show where they came from.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions from the comment section? No. Okay. I think Brother Natural wanted to show you something regarding his DNA. It's actually
Mhm.
very interesting what he about to show you.
Okay.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Pretty good, you.
Pretty good.
I'm good. Let me
Doing
share
well.
this screen. All right, this some good match. Can
Wait,
y'all see?
uh, why am I the only person that can share something? This is crazy. There we go. There you
All right, y'all can see that.
go. Mm-hmm.
So I notice right here it says the Montana Clovis.
Mm. Now, where do you
And
have that sent? Where do you have that set? At what centimorgan? You should use 1 centimeter. I'm sure it'll
yeah,
still
this is 1 centimeter. I could go do it live time and
good.
show you.
Good. Okay. Yeah. So you have a lot of match in the Clovis as expected, which just reflects the Mongo mixture.
Right, and I got a lot of Russian
Uh huh.
on some of my stuff.
Right, because there were also Asiatic tribes that migrated in Central Asian. This is why you noticed Russell Wilson showed that Central Asian. That's the Ugyars, the Chuvash, the those tribes.
All right. Okay, next slide. Now, I guess this was showing my maternal and paternal according to I guess each group.
Hmm.
And uh, what caught my eye in here was this right here for Brazil.
Hmm.
And
Let me see that again, please.
there you go.
I'm kind of Brazil.
Hey,
That's
zoom in.
okay. Okay, that Brazil is the that's a population in Brazil that if you look at the ancestral composition of those particular Brazilian samples, they are basically a colony of Austronesians that settled in Brazil. So that should not surprise you because remember the Austronesians were the earliest seafarers that came in and intermingled with our most ancient ancestors. So being that they are very similar in genetics to those Austronesians. In fact, that's really what they are. Those particular samples there, it would make sense that you would have some matching to them. And Kennewick man, I see your match to him.
Yeah, Miko just told me about him. I ain't know nothing about this person. What else? It was something else. I did see something dealing with the Australian. There it is. Oh yeah, in Peru.
That's dope.
That's it.
Hmm. Well, I'm not surprised. Remember, you had that tiny Native American matching to now, even though it's the Mongol reflection, it's still remember they've been here for some time. So
Hmm.
the people that mixed in with us, remember, even if they're newcomers, they are still footprints to where our ancestors were. So I didn't forget you had that match to Peru and Bolivia, was it?
Right.
Right. So I'm not surprised to see that. You already have shown you have ancient ancestors out of the South America region.
Now, there was something else. Where is it? This one, I believe. Well, I seen that I had. I was looking at the American part on here, and I
Mm-hmm.
seen the one you was talking about the Bantu. It says Northeast Bantu,
Mm-hmm.
or 93%,
Mm-hmm.
and then they got the Bolivian 96.
Mm-hmm.
I can't pronounce that one right there, but that one's American too, and the Mayan.
Caraciana, that's an Amazon, South
Oh
American
yeah,
tribe.
oh
Australia,
yeah,
you had you have Australoid populations that were indigenous even before you had the Yoruba Igbo types coming in from the Roman Empire. You remember you were telling me about your Welsh ancestors,
yeah.
how yes, that they were Australoid. In fact, if you read David McRitchie's works, he talks about the indigenous population in those places being of Australoid. See, understand that the same way you had different groups of people in ancient America, melanated, okay? You had the Moors coming in as West African, the Malian Empire coming in here. They came in later, even though they were before Columbus. Everybody wasn't here from ancient times. The same thing was going on in Europe. So you had the Pygmies over there. You had the Bantus over there. I showed that with Otzi. You also had an Australoid population who had oceanic type DNA. And this is why even today, people from Ireland and Scotland often wonder why they get tiny matches to Papuan and oceanic. And that's really a vestige of the ancient people who were of that type, Australoid type people. They would have been melanated with frizzy hair, but they were in that area even before the Yoruba types of Africans and the Igbos came in. Those guys came in late with the Roman Empire.
Right. I know you was talking about the cosine. What's it called? The cosine.
Hmm.
Cosine. They said I had 76% of that with what's it called?
Is
The
that does that say
bicep.
Khoisan at the top?
Yeah.
I can't read it. Okay, I'll take your word for it.
Oh yeah.
Oh yes, 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 yes. The Khoisan was here. The Khoisan was global.
Right.
So you
And
see,
I
but read Wikipedia and don't read anything else, and they'll tell you you were snatched off a boat from the Bida Bennett, Bida Biafra, right? Bida Biafra, and somebody from the plantation, white, mixed in with your ancestors, and that's what you are, throwaway African, mixed in with some slave masters, and that's all you are. And if you don't do any reading and take control of your DNA and study it for yourself, which is what I encourage, then you'll believe it. But when you study the DNA, which is what I encourage, you will see your own DNA and the results using third party tests. This is an example of what he's doing. What he's doing right here is using third party tests. This is not someone taking the interpretation and then giving you some results telling you that you 40% Nigerian. Now throwing on a Nigerian hat and going over there looking for your people. You're looking at your own stuff. And now these are not perfect, okay? But
mm,
it's still better than relying on someone else telling you, here, these are your results.
right. I also trace myself back to I think about one or two pygmies. Well, here's
That's
one
good.
right here. What's the name of it?
Bianca Pygmy. Mhm.
Right. And
What, if you don't mind, what screen is this? What program is this you're using?
Jad match.
Which I've never used this one. This is a nice screen.
Oh, the name of this one
Oh, you're using
is
the spreadsheet.
yeah.
Nice. Nice.
Let's see. The Peruvian, I think, yeah, you already covered that one. The Mayan, you already covered that one. Oh, yeah, the Malaysian. I think Malayan.
Is this the Ethiopia still?
I think I got to go back and see.
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I was just curious.
I wasn't done. Also seeing the I was going to ask you about the Cohen Jew.
You see it there?
Yeah, it says right here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not surprised about that. Oh, the Cochin Jew? Cochin, aren't they the Jews from India?
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
They are? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I would have to do some reading as to whether they were also in England. Were they part of the Lascar population? I don't know the answer to that. So some of our people get matches to it. I can't explain it. I know how we get India. I know how we get Pakistan, Afghanistan, Balkan, Greek, Romanian, but Cochin Jew, I'm not sure. I would have to read it and figure that out. But if you're getting it, there's a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Trying to stop screen sharing. There you go.
That's very interesting, though. That he got the Cochin Jew. That's very interesting.
I have seen it popped up on oracles, but I never dived into it.
I have never seen that.
Yeah.
Anybody have any questions? I can't see the chat.
Hey Miko, well, I guess those Israelites wasn't lying.
What you mean that you were Israelite, or are you talking about like what are you talking about?
I guess I'm talking about I was an Israelite.
What we want to find out were there, because England was a refuge for a lot of Jewish people, Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Jews. What we want to find out is if Cochin Jews were also among people that were fleeing there. Because England was a big melting pot. That's why we get a lot of those markers. Because our ancestors, majority of the ones that came in as that became enslaved were not from Africa. They were from areas where even if they were predominantly black, I say that in quote, or of African descent, they were still miscegenated because they were in Europe for some time and all these people were living there. And London was a port city.
I actually have a question. Okay, I asked you that. You actually answered one of my questions indirectly. Actually, a couple of them. Okay. Let's see. Who would you say we are in relation to the pygmy skulls? I know that question is going to sound very familiar, and you know who always asks that. Who would you say we are? Well, let me ask it again. Who would you say we are in relation to the pygmy skulls in Holliston Mills, Tennessee?
Oh, we are their descendants.
Ah, okay.
That's why we get pygmy. And
Right.
they are similar. They are similar to the pygmies that are in Africa in the same way we are similar to the Bantu people in the Bantu areas of Africa. But understand, pygmy DNA was global. I showed you the Lebanese man. He had pygmy. Pygmies were there. Otzi, the 5,000-year-old frozen mummy, he had a bunch of pygmy. Bianca pygmy to top it off. That's just genetic similarity. And they're using the reference as from the Bianca pygmies in Africa. That's all.
Perfect. Phoenix, you have any other questions or natural?
Nah, that's it. I'm still looking into my Oh, that's a feedback. Yeah, I'm still looking to my DNA. So I'm gonna hold that on my questions.
Mhm. I look at genealogy and DNA studies as a lifetime journey.
Absolutely.
It's not something that you achieve and you finish. It's a never ending journey because the more you learn, the more you're going to want to know. So see now you have some coaching Jewish going on there. Now I have to find out about that because I've seen it before, but I just never zoned in on it.
Who would you say, like with all this being said, how would you say this relates to the she,
Does she?
the
Oh,
Olmecs?
the Chi people.
No, the Olmec.
Yeah. Oh, the Olmec. Olmec.
Mm.
Okay. The Olmec. My understanding is that the Olmec were indigenous, and my understanding, this is what I'm being told. So I'm repeating what was told to me by actually people who one is a Lumbee and one is related to the Lumbee, and they told me that the Olmecs were actually the ancestors of Eastern Woodland people.
Oh wow,
Yes. Now, I believe it.
me too.
And let me tell you why. Because, I believe DNA. And when you look at the GEDmatch and you look at a number of sources genetically, and I'm sure you've seen it, have you noticed that a lot of our people get matches to the Yucatan?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, and a lot of us that have Muscagean lineage, by the way, and I learned this from Native DNA because I went back and forth and asking him a whole bunch of questions, and he is very good with. He loves answering questions, and he told me that people who have more of a Muscagean lineage background, Muscagean tribes being Creek, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, who were once one people, by the way, the Yamasees, who are really Creeks lineage wise, Seminoles, who are primarily Creek mixed in with other tribes, but those tribes down in that Mississippi Basin area or Muscagean, he said they have a tendency to have more of the Austronesian markers. Now, I noticed looking at results that I'm distantly, one of my ancestors was Piscataway, distantly. It's coming from my great great grandparents. One of them, I'm trying to figure it out because I match all of them. Literally, my uncle and my mom, they match all of them. You press one, the rest of the tribe pops up. And by the way, that's a sign of endogamy. And if you have 10 more minutes. I know we've been speaking a long time, and I really was a little rushed to complete the presentation, but I feel it's a little incomplete because I spoke so much about our DNA, but I need to include something, and I wish I had the pictures, but I will say what it is. And most of your audience, if any of your audience has done Ancestry DNA, they will know what I'm talking about.
You're more than welcome to always come back. I mean, get this off definitely, but this ain't gonna be the last time. You're more than welcome to
Okay.
always come back.
All right, so I'm gonna make it real quick, and then it'll give us something to deal with next time.
Mhm.
Well, when you look at Ancestry DNA, and they give us the African American genetic communities, and by the way, I must give credit where credit is due. What I'm saying is not from me; it's from American Harris. She put this out, and I don't know if she was getting a lot of, harassment about it, but she took that video down. But it is absolutely true. And Tyrone Lewis Cannon said she was 100% on point. The so called African American communities that they give you on Ancestry DNA is based on, what did I say a genetic community was? A group of people in an area that intermingle among themselves in the last 300 years. Guess what? That's where your major indigenous tribes are located. So for those of you that want to know who are my indigenous tribes, Ancestry DNA told you the regions they were from, and they are in those areas, whether they are the East Texas, Louisiana border, whatever they are called, Virginia border, early North Carolina, ain't nothing but Cherokee. I figured that out, by the way. That's another story. But Virginia border, Piedmont part of North Carolina. If you look at those areas, that's where your tribes are from. Not all your tribes, because one of the things that I learned from Native DNA is that we are so miscegenated because our people had an intricate trading system long before anyone came here. So this is why we get tribal affiliations to even as far north as Canada, Salish tribes from Northwest part of the United States, because our people was trading back and forth. So, you could be from Virginia and we're getting these little hits matching to the Choctaw, to the Creeks, and that's because of trading. A lot of this was already inside of us, but I'm talking about the major tribes. Absolutely, it was on point. When you look at the areas that my mom and my uncle have in terms of their African American community, lines up with my genealogical research. I already knew without DNA that the main tribes that they descended from were Algonquian tribes. I couldn't say it wasn't they didn't have any Iroquois. I couldn't say that, but I knew it was the tribes coming out of Virginia who are primarily Algonquian. Now, when I did Native DNA, the main tribes that my mother and uncle matched were Algonquian. And then later on, Anunnaki, which they call Cherokee, and then other stuff came in, but it matched right along with my genealogical research before anything, and the areas that were given to both of them as African American communities. The reason why our people are being confused with this is the African American community is being exposed, so they let you see the details of that African DNA. What happens with the Samoans and all these other people is they close off their categories and they just report their genetic community. With yours, they don't give your genetic community as your ethnicity. So the truth is, you really should be called Indigenous American, and then they should put underneath it from Eastern North Carolina, Virginia border, North Carolina. That's really what you are. But what they did was they made it an appendage, and they gave you African American community, and then they exposed what was in it, and then you see this Nigerian, Cameroon, Congo, and that has people confused. And what they did with the Samoan is they closed off their community and just give them Samoan, not letting you see what was inside of the Samoan, and then you'll see a little bit of whatever else is mixed with them. So you think that the only people that has African DNA would be us and Africans, not realizing that even the Samoan, the Fijian, the Cambodians, all of them have varying percentages of African DNA mixed with newer DNA, creating a genetic community called Cambodian, Vietnamese, because they all have a certain percentage of African DNA, and the same applies to various regions around the world, including the so-called Middle East, North Africa. But they play this game of the only people on the planet who has African DNA is Africans and so-called Afro-Americans and Caribbeans. And it's a form of isolation and picking on the most ancient people of the planet, when the truth is that DNA is global and everyone has it. That's all. If you don't have it, come from, because that's the primordial DNA of the planet. So you
It
better
makes
have
me think about like with the Elijah Muhammad and all when they talk about the Asiatic black man. And when you trace back to Asia, Cambodia, and all those areas, and you talk to the elders or whatever there, and they'll explain to you and tell you how their ancestors were more melanated,
Mhm.
um, you know, more, coarse hair and all of that. I remember speaking with some Hispanics or even Mexicans who would say that as well. Like their children were trying to laugh at the fact that somebody I was with was dark skinned. They were like, don't do that. It's disrespecting your ancestors because your ancestors look just like them.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, look at the picture of the Samoan that I showed earlier. He looks like people from here.
Hmm.
In fact, I've seen him without his do rag on. He has kinky hair. He wears a do rag because he wants to get the same styles like the men here.
Yeah. Well, look, Dr. Fatou, we really appreciate you being here. We thank you so much for all this knowledge you just dropped on us. I mean, it's a lot, and we would love for you to come back another time so we can go further. You can go further in on some more stuff. This was such a good time, some wonderful gems and jewels being dropped. Um, we thank you so much.
Absolutely. So I want your listening audience to replay the video, truly learn it, because what I'm teaching, you can take this and you can apply it to any test. So you'll learn to recognize it. So when you see the Bantu, you see the West African, you'll know that's the Moor part of me. That's the original part of me. And you will understand where all of it means.
Yes, yes. Well, we also want to go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, guys. Go ahead.
You had a question or comment? Because I was gonna.
I was just gonna thank her for being here because I learned so much from her. I talk to her every day, so I learn a lot from her every single day. And but this right here, to me, I think that people need to watch this over and over and over again because I know I don't like how they. I don't even want to bring up the negative aspect of what happened, but they were attacking our brother Natural about saying that, oh, well, the doctor said you're African, but it's like it went over your head like a bulimic on a seesaw. You
Mhm.
don't get what she's saying. Like she's really saying that you're from here, your genetic
Mhm.
markers are here, and they're not understanding that they want to be African so bad, which is no problem if you're African at all. You know, we're not disparaging anybody on any continent, but she's literally telling you that you're home. Why would you argue with that?
I mean, the Samoan, the Polynesians, they have African DNA too. They're not leaving their lands to go back to Africa. And what happens is when you are attached to a belief system because that's your personal hangup, you will not properly listen. And that's what happens. That individual who said that, or the set of individuals who just heard African, they didn't listen to anything that I said. They just heard African and they just wanted to go get, to because that's what they want to be. And that's fine if that's what you want to be. But I'm not pushing an identity. I'm just here to teach the truth about DNA. If you want to call yourself an African, go right ahead. That's your right. But what you cannot do is take that and impose that onto anybody else, because I can prove that that same African DNA, and I have proven it, is global. And none of these other people are calling themselves African. But if that's what you want to do, be my guest.
Mhm. So we have one last question got in before we closed it out. I don't know how you pronounce that. Is it Cohenum DNA?
Mhm.
What can you say about this?
Well, what I understand about the Cohen DNA, Cohanum DNA, it's found among people who are Jewish, among a particular group among them who descend from Levitical priests, if I understand correctly. And that DNA is actually found among the Lumber tribe.
Mhm.
So that's why they have been able to accurately And the state of Israel, I understand there are Israeli groups that recognize them. There are Jewish newspapers that recognize them because of that. And I mean, I'm in genetic groups with people of Jewish faith. And the Mazra people of, what I might be mispronouncing, the Mazrahi Jews, Jews from Iraq, Jews, Sephardic Jews, and Yemenite Jews. And let me tell you something, when they do the archaeogenetics, they are matching ancient sites of Israel, but they're not the only people that match the ancient sites in Israel.
We are.
Okay.
Okay.
So they're not lying, but they're just not the only ones matching those sites.
Okay.
That's true.
That's why I can't co-sign what the guys on the corner are teaching because I'm in genetic groups and I see that they also match. You
I
understand?
knew you were gonna bring them. I knew you were gonna say that.
Yeah, you know, whatever.
Okay. Well, we're going to go ahead and end it here. We want to thank everybody for coming in, for your questions, for just all your love and support on YouTube. We thank you guys so much. If you can go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. Facebook, go ahead and like and share us out. Again, Dr. Fatou, we thank you so much for being here. Natural, we thank you for coming on in and sharing your results with us. We're going to go ahead and end the live here. Miko, you want to say anything? Any last words?
I want to thank everybody for coming out, especially the doctor. You could be anywhere else in the world, but you're here with us. Thank you so much. We appreciate that. Most
Absolutely.
definitely.
And thank y'all too for letting me come up. Sorry, I'm in two lives at the same time, so I'm trying to dodge it back and forth. But yeah, thank you for having me up, and thank you,
No
Doc,
problem.
for going over my DNA for me.
All right,
And
you
thank
guys.
you
You guys have a
too.
wonderful night. Until next time. Peace.
All right, peace.